Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the clamour from all sides to intervene in the national rollout of universal credit is rising. Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, faces calls to open the country's chequebook ahead of his budget at the end of the month. Yesterday, Esther McVeigh, the Work and Pensions Secretary, said that she accepts that many people would be significantly worse off. Today, The Times reported that some charities involved in the implementation of the policy are operating under gagging clauses to prevent them from criticising her. But at the heart of this political row are the thousands of people affected. Tonight, Jackie Long speaks to three of them about their experiences at the sharp end of the policy, which was meant to make their lives better.
There is a feeling, where did it all go wrong? You know, because this wasn't the plan.
Former merchant seaman Barry Horsnell has found himself living close to the sea once again. Left adrift when the certainties of his life came crashing down. Until recently a carer for his mother, when she had to be moved into a home, he lost the home he shared with her. He was put on universal credit 5 months ago. He says it left him having to rely on a food bank for the first time in his life.
Barry, you've got bread in there, but it's been frozen, so defrost very quickly. I hope that helps you now over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you so much.
God
All
bless.
right, you take care now. Okay, cheers.
What did it feel like that first time you went to the food bank?
Don't know, Barry.
It felt shameful. Yeah, it felt. I felt embarrassed. In my mind, it was a form of begging. You know, most of us are brought up with the idea you stand on your own 2 feet, you work, get out and work, whatever.
Government has tried to make universal credit work better for vulnerable people. It's shortened the wait for a first payment from 6 to 5 weeks. It now offers a loan to help people get through that period. But for Barry, the loan just means he's hurtling towards more debt. He receives just over £700 a month on the benefit. His rent is nearly £500. He's in rent arrears and will soon have to start paying back his benefit loan too.
They take the loan at source over 12 monthly payments, and it leaves you incredibly short of money. There's 2 issues there. Firstly, you go hungry. Secondly, it's an emotional sort of mental health issue, because if you are living in your accommodation and you are frightened that you can't make your rent, you feel that you might be put on the street, evicted, so on and so forth, it's a very difficult period. You feel anxiety, stress, that there's nowhere to hide from.
Entirely run by volunteers, this is the food bank which helped Barry. They say they're seeing many like him.
I've just spoken to a lady out there. It's the first time she's ever been in a food bank. She's got £1.75 in her purse.
Yeah.
Is that common?
That's common. Common. Yeah. We're seeing that all the time.
That woman doesn't want to talk to us, quite understandably. She's embarrassed, she feels ashamed, but she's desperate for food.
Desperate for food. We often find people hover in the street when that's their first time because of that embarrassment. Don't know what they're going to expect. They don't know how we're going to approach them, what it's going to be like, what's the experience going to be like. And we just try to be as kind and as gentle and as Christian as we can with them.
My mum, I do feel real bad on her because she's very ill, and I'll do whatever she needs doing. I just like helping out.
15-year-old Tory is on the campaign trail. With her friends, she's part of a project trying to end the stigma faced by people living in poverty. She's one of the speakers at a Church Action on Poverty conference next week, calling on the government to fix universal credit.
I've been part of poverty and they do know what they're on about.
Corey knows more about benefits than most 15-year-olds. Until 3 weeks ago, she was the main carer for her mum, who has severe epilepsy, and her 2 younger brothers.
I cook for my boys, and I do call them my boys, but they are my mum's, but I feel like a mum to them.
The family went on universal credit in the summer. Waiting 5 weeks for the first payment was, she says, painful.
It was hard, like really hard. We had to sometimes go without the biggest meals, so we had to have horrible food, cheap, rubbish food. We had to sometimes wash in cold water and just things like that. Just left us a bit hungry at the end of it.
And what was that like?
Devastated. Sometimes I didn't invite my friends over, like, hey, coming over, I'll put a film on, you buy some crisps.
There's no doubt that pressure is increasing on the government over universal credit. But that pressure isn't new. This was a policy which had cross-party support when it was launched back in 2011. But the very next year, the Local Government Association was warning that the computer system wouldn't be ready in time. By 2013, the then chair of the Public Accounts Committee described it as an unmitigated disaster of extraordinary proportions. Then by the end of last year, the chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, Frank Field, said universal credit was contributing to state-sponsored destitution. One of the most controversial elements of universal credit was paying housing benefits straight to tenants rather than to their landlords. That too has had an impact. A survey of 118 housing associations across England, Wales and Scotland revealed tenants on universal credit had arrears of more than £24 million. Your Homes Newcastle, for example, have almost 5,000 tenants on the benefit. It says arrears solely due to universal credit total more than £1,440,000. In Manchester, Halton Housing said average rent arrears had nearly doubled since the introduction of universal credit to £409. The government says universal credit should always make work pay. Yesterday, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions conceded some people would be worse off.
So what are we seeing here?
Patricia believes she's one of them. She's volunteered at this charity for 17 years and now relies on them for help every month to budget. Her job is unpredictable. If she works extra hours, she says the next month her universal credit is cut.
If I do more hours, I don't get no universal credit at all for a whole month. So whatever money I've got left, either from working or the previous month's universal credit, I have to make that last until the following month, when hopefully I'll get some universal credit.
As many more families face the prospect of going on to universal credit, the government insists it will work and those who need support will receive it. But with criticism increasingly coming from within its own party, is a makeover now inevitable?
Jackie Long with that report. And the Department of Work and Pensions has given us this statement. The country took difficult decisions to reduce the welfare bill, but the government was clear that it had to be fair to both taxpayers and claimants. Universal credit is working for the vast majority of people, they say. We're listening, learning and responding to concerns and constantly looking to improve the benefit. We are targeting support to the most vulnerable. Cathy.
Thanks, Matt. Well, joining me now to discuss the issue is the Conservative MP, Heidi Allen. Heidi, you might have heard Jackie Long's report there and the impact that universal credit problems is having on people. And I just wondered what your reaction was to that first.
Well, as a member of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, we've been looking at universal credit non-stop really since I became an MP and joined the committee in 2015. So, unfortunately, the stories that I've just heard are not unusual. The government is steadily putting in improvements and things that particularly we've recommended on the committee. So some of the things around rent arrears, for example, should be fixed now because in the autumn statement last year, one of the part of the 1.5 billion package of improvements we got was for people on housing benefit coming onto UC. They get an additional 2 weeks extra housing benefit that they wouldn't have to pay back. But I can't pretend that the transition into universal credit has been perfect, far from it, and there's still a lot of work to do.
Well, what would you like to hear from the Prime Minister? Because she's promised to meet you about your concerns, hasn't she? When's that happening and what do you want to hear from her?
No, I haven't asked for a meeting with the Prime Minister. It's possible that we will ask for one.
Well, I thought
a number of us are in
one
correspondence.
In the Prime Minister's questions, I thought she'd offered you a meeting.
No, this week my question was about sleep-in shifts in the care sector. But this time last year, I did ask for a meeting on universal credit, and it's very likely that if these things aren't resolved, then I and colleagues will be asking for another one. But I do sense that, ultimately, this is a decision for the Chancellor and the Prime Minister around funding. There are three broad aspects to universal credit I'd like to see changed. One is the current system just in terms of its general operational capability, payment timeliness. I want to see those advance payments not put people into debt. Second thing is about funding it better in more general terms, so work allowances need to be improved for people with children. And the third piece that people are starting to talk about is what will happen towards the end of next year when people on old benefits move on to the new system. We've got a lot of work to do to make sure that the system can handle that.
But
so these are all the things that I'm talking to the Secretary of State about.
Where would you find that extra £2 billion that would fund some of these changes that you want put in?
Well, there are a couple of options. So when claimants on old benefits, income support, DLA, whatever it might be, move on to the new universal credit towards the end of next year, the government have put aside £3 billion in what they call transitional protection to make sure that anybody that moves across doesn't lose anything, with the new system being less generous. If we were to pump some money into the system, that would mean some of that money we wouldn't need next year because the system would be better financed. So a big chunk of the money could be taken from that. And any that's still lacking, many of us on the Conservative side feel that the planned increases in the tax threshold, they should be postponed or cancelled because frankly they benefit everybody. They benefit me, they benefit you, but we're not the people that need it. Putting money into universal credit rather than generic tax threshold changes for everyone means that the people that really need it, the concentration is there.
But some of your colleagues say, you're Conservatives, you should be in favour of cutting taxes, and you're arguing the opposite here.
Yes, keeping taxes low, of course, is good to stimulate the economy, but as we're seeing with the NHS and a growing ageing population, sometimes you just have to be honest and say if we want good public support, whether in the form of the NHS or the welfare system, then we have to pay for that. And universal credit, if we remember, was significantly better funded prior to 2015. The budget that was set aside at the time to make universal credit work properly has been substantially cut. So we have to find the money if we want it to work properly and support people into work, which ultimately will, of course, generate more tax and pay us back for that.
Why, in your view, is it so crucial that the government acts on this? What is the response you're getting from your constituents? What is the scale of anger?
Well, I, to be honest, don't have it from my constituents because universal credit, the full service, is literally only just rolling out as we speak. I take my knowledge and my evidence from sitting on the Work and Pensions Select Committee, and it's important that the government address this and fund it properly because these are people. Back in my very first maiden speech in 2015, when we were looking about proposed cuts to tax credits, these are not pieces of information on a spreadsheet. These are people, families, children, the well-being of communities. And that, to me, is one of the most fundamental responsibilities of a government, is to care for the welfare of people when they are struggling to make ends meet. And that is everything the Prime Minister tells us she stands for.
And if the Prime Minister doesn't act, is this potentially her poll tax?
Well, that was an analogy that John Major drew. I think he was probably a little dramatic about it, but I do understand his point about fairness, which of course was one of the big things that upset people, the poll tax. The idea that you could have two families living next door to each other, one that had moved from the old system and had their benefits protected, and people next door who are new to universal credit coming on a lower rate. And it's that sense of fairness that I think is very important to the British people, and for that reason alone, I believe that the Prime Minister will do something.
Heidi Allen, thank you very much for joining us. Now, George Osborne, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer and the man who drove the austerity agenda, has been criticised for his decision to remove billions from the universal credit and has spoken to our political editor, Gary Gibbon. In an interview for our new political podcast, he gave a robust defence of his actions.
No one thinks that the welfare system was working particularly well a decade ago. Universal credit was introduced by a coalition government in order to incentivise work, make sure that people weren't in these sort of very arbitrary high rates of taxation in effect if they took an extra hour's work. It's all very well saying, let's spend a lot more money on welfare, let's spend a lot more money on the health service, let's spend a lot more money on the police service, let's spend a lot more money in the army. Of course you can do more to clamp down on tax evasion, but the idea that that is going to fund massive expansions of your welfare state, or just forget it.
And you can listen to the full interview on Gary Gibbon's podcast, Politics Where Next, available on all good podcast apps now. And there'll be new episodes every Friday.